Well, hello everyone. Welcome to the Shifts and Bucks podcast. You can follow us on Twitter at Shifts and Bucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Bucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Bucks. Subscribe wherever you get your audio. Coming to you solo this morning. Wanted to talk a little bit about the interviews this week with Don Maloney, the president of hockey operations with the Calgary Flames. There's been a lot of conversation this season with two report with, well, first of all, the Murray Edwards conversation, the Darren Dreger report of not wanting to trade at Anaheim Calgary, created a spark. And I, at that point, was thinking that this was a little bit of an overreaction because we didn't hear from Murray Edwards. We've never really heard from Murray Edwards, which is partly a criticism on Flames ownership in some ways, that we haven't heard from them. Not that you should always be doing interviews of your owners, but I think that sometimes the fans would like to hear from Murray Edwards directly, not just from insiders. And this week we got to hear Don Maloney in the first intermission of the Calgary Flames Buffalo Sabres game, and we are getting to read the words of Don Maloney with an interview with Eric Francis that is on sportsnet.ca. And there was a part one that has caused a reaction, and we're about to hear part two a little later on, where he specifically is going to get into players like Rasmus Anderson, Nazem Kadri, Blake Coleman, which a lot of Flame fans are thinking should be traded. And then some other players as well, Matt Bagrid and Zane Parekh, and of course, GM Craig Conroy. And this is kind of one of the first places that I do want to go that is a little bit of a red flag for me. We did hear from Craig Conroy back when the extensions were signed for Michael Backlund and Dustin Wolf, but we have not yet heard from him for this season. And normally this would not be a red flag, but Craig Conroy is in the final year of his contract. He extended Wolf, he extended Coronado, he even extended Michael Backlund, and he even extended the head coach, Ryan Huska. He gave him a 2-year extension. Now, I'm sure that Craig Conroy didn't do these willy-nilly on his own. I'm sure that this was done in collaboration with everybody else. But in terms of messaging, in terms of a person that I think has a bit more confidence in the market, Craig Conroy has the ability to give some reassurance to Flames fans. He's just a little bit more casual in front of the microphone. He talks a lot. He cracks jokes. He makes things a little bit lighter. Don Maloney is a heavier conversation. Don Maloney comes across very serious. His look is very serious. His demeanor is very serious. And I think that for some Flame fans, that doesn't portray a bunch of confidence. However, that being said, I think that there's more issues than that when we look at what Don Maloney has said here. And I think we need to start with the conversation that he had with Brendan Parker in Buffalo, where talked about the season, talked about it not going the way that they thought, kind of expecting to be in a playoff position, expecting to be battling for a playoff position based on last year. And they are in last place. Hold that thought, because we'll get to that a little bit later on. He also maintained that they're going to be competing for a playoff. They want to compete for a playoff spot. Frustration. Parker then asked a bit about changing direction, and Don Maloney was like, we're fighting and we want to win and we want to compete for a playoff spot. Now, I don't think, leaving this interview when I heard it from Don Maloney, I don't think there was anything there that really surprised me. That really was like nothing too overly different than the majority of most conversations that you would have with the president of hockey operations. It's standard speak. We want to compete for the playoffs, etc., etc., etc. Of course, everybody can read the room here. The Flames are, I was mentioned, in 32nd place. There is very little chance, and only one team in the spot of in 55 years, which were, by the way, the 95-96 Flames, came from this far back to make the playoffs. And by the way, when they got into the playoffs, which was a year that Jerome McGinley debuted, they got swept. It was a very quick in the playoffs and out. And I think that when you look at this Flames team, if they make the playoffs, I think a lot of people do not believe that they're going to go any further than 4 games. As Daryl Sutter said, might be a waste of 8 days. That's what a lot of people might be thinking at this point. So let's fast forward to the Eric Francis interview, which is part 1, which came out again today or yesterday, Friday, and then again we're going to have part 2 on Saturday. And I'm recording this before the part 2 part. And a couple of things here is the question: has this altered the organization's approach moving forward? And the answer from Don Maloney is no. Our message is the same. Then the next question is at some point, if the losing continues, could the season possibly alter the approach of the organization? The answer: I don't think it would alter the long-term approach. We're so conscious of the culture here and creating the right environment to grow these players. We feel it's better to grow winning players in a winning environment. Excuse me. We're still going to lean on our veterans, but leave the opportunities for some younger players to come in when they're ready. I don't think the overall approach is changing as we sit here as of November 22nd. Okay. Then the next question is the narrative accurate that the directive from ownership is that they're not going to be a reset or rebuild? And Maloney's answer is interesting here. No, I don't think that's accurate. We have a collective group here with Dave Nonis, Craig, myself, Brad Pascal, Peter Hanlon, and we discuss how we move forward. We all want to win a cup. Yet there's a dynamic in Canada. You have 82 games. You want to sell tickets and get people to come to your games. It kind of works all together. No one has an appetite to just burn it to the studs and take it all down. There's examples out there right now where you're taking potentially decades it can take to rebuild. I'm assuming he's talking about Buffalo and maybe Detroit. The draft is such an inexact thing. It could be guaranteed that you could get a superstar franchise level player. If you could be guaranteed that you could get a superstar franchise level player every year, I'm sure ownership of any team would say, okay, yeah, we'll suffer for 2 or 3 years, but we just don't think that's the way for us. We prefer a Dallas model where they get a Miro Heiskanen at 3, but also get good players in the 20s and the 30s. We've got to be better in our drafting and developing versus saying, let's just lose easy for everybody. We don't want that culture as part of this organization. Okay, let me stop here because I think that there's a bunch of meat in this bone that needs to be unpacked. He's right in the sense that the number 1 pick is not always going to be a franchise player. You look at those Yuri Slavkovsky, you will not consider him a franchise player. Alexis Lafreniere, which, by the way, I will admit and kind of double down on an important point. You don't necessarily have to finish last to get the first pick. The Rangers did not finish last that year when they picked Alexis Lafreniere. If you remember, that was the playoff bubble COVID year where the lotto pick was the person that lost, the team that lost was the team that lost in that first round of that bubble play-in series. That was the year that Alexis Lafreniere was taken and Quentin Byfield was taken second. Probably, and Jake Sanderson, by the way, was also in that draft, as was Tim Stützle. So that was a pretty interesting draft. And now you take Lafreniere, and you probably redo a redraft, and he's probably a little further down that list. And then even the Yuri Slavkovsky draft, I think that you can argue probably Logan Cooley's the first pick in the draft. And then there's the Buffalo Sabres with Owen Power. And that was not necessarily one of the best drafts ever. It wasn't considered a high-end draft. But a lot of people wonder what would happen if Owen Power was not wearing a Buffalo Sabres jersey and was wearing another jersey. Now, let's look at the current playoff situation and where we are at right now in the Western Conference, because that also is very This is an interesting telltale sign of where we're going, not where we are at and where we are going. So the Pacific Division specifically, the first place team is the Anaheim Ducks. Now, they did not have a first pick, but they took Leo Carlsson in the Connor Bedard draft, and nobody's talking enough about Barrett Seneke, who a lot of people scratched the head of the Anaheim Ducks of how Barrett Seneke was picked third, but man, that guy is something else. And you are currently looking at a player that's probably is in the Calder conversation, is probably second in the Calder conversation if he's a rookie. And you got Leo Carlsson, who is. There was some talk that some people thought maybe he could have went number one that year, the year of Connor Bedard. But he was taken second, and he looks like he's going to be an elite center going forward. Not only that, they got Mason McTavish, who is a center that everybody would love to have on their team. So you've got that. You've got your two centers in place here. You were able to trade Jamie Drysdale for Cutter Gauthier, which was a high pick into Philadelphia. Barrett Seneke, 15 points. You do have some veterans, no question. You were able to find a Jackson Lacombe in the second round as well. You got Olin Zellweger in there. You got there's some pretty good young players in that situation, and you got a goaltender, Lucas Dossel. But Leo, let's focus on the top pick here, which is Leo Carlsson. Vegas, you have Jack Eichel. They're going to be there for a while. They're going to be Vegas, and they're not going anywhere in terms of standings at this particular point, right? And then you've got the LA Kings, who I think probably everybody has seen them on a downturn without an Anze Kopitar, and Quentin Byfield might be a number one center. We don't know, but you got a second pick. And then, of course, in the other side of the Western Conference, you got the Colorado Avalanche, who have Nathan MacKinnon, who, if you don't think is the best player in the world, he's probably the second best player in the world. And by the way, the Colorado Avalanche have only lost once in regulation. And there's the Dallas Stars and Minnesota Wild. But look who's knocking on the door. You've got the Chicago Blackhawks with Connor Bedard. You've got the San Jose. They are in the wild card here, basically 2 points out of a playoff spot. You got, of course, the Edmonton Oilers, who have been to back-to-back Stanley Cup finals and conference finals 3 of the last 4 years with an incomplete team, but they have Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl and solves a lot of problems. And then you got the San Jose Sharks with Macklin Celebrini, who we're at 10-8-3, and it's kind of knocking on this door. Probably will the Sharks make the playoffs this year? Probably not. Are they going to make the playoffs in the future? Absolutely. And then you look at the Pacific Division overall. You look at Anaheim; they're probably not leaving when they get into the playoffs. They're staying in the playoffs for a long time. You've got Vegas that's probably locked in for a spot forever, and probably San Jose is going to be either knocking on the door for a wild card spot or division eventually. The Sharks are coming. Are they this year? No. Are they next year? I don't know, but they're pretty damn close. And Chicago, a couple of interesting things with this. You had Connor Bedard. You've Connor Bedard and given an A this week, wearing an A during one of the game against Seattle. And, let's just face it here. Connor Bedard has completely owned the Calgary Flames this season. He scored 4 points in a win against in Calgary where they shut them out. And then he had another 3-4 points against the Flames this week in a game that Don Maloney watched the night before that Brendan Parker interview. And the Flames, you look at the Flames scoring part here. Not only are they in 32nd in points, they are 31st in goals for. So you cannot tell me, I think, you cannot sit here with any sort of intellectual honesty and tell me that the Calgary Flames do not need an elite top flight center. And can you get that type of player outside the top 10? Maybe. The chances are that you're going to find them in the top 10. Very fortunately, the Vegas Golden Knights were able to negotiate with one of the worst organizations in sports in the Buffalo Sabres, who had Jack Eichel. And let's call this for what this is with the Buffalo Sabres. They completely muffed this up. They refused to give Jack Eichel the option to have the surgery that he wanted, and he soured on the organization. And it was ended up being traded to Vegas. You are not going forward with the Western Conference. There is no way that you are not going to face an elite franchise number one center in at least one round of the playoffs. You've got Celebrini, you've got Bedard, you've got McKinnon. At least that's three at this point. And for now, I want to touch on this a little bit better. You've got Connor McDavid and the Edmonton Oilers. So that's four elite franchise centers plus Leo Carlson. Let's add him. You've got five elite number one centers in the Western Conference that you are going to have to face. And the Calgary Flames' biggest weakness over the years since 1990 is they have not had a consistent number one center. They've had moments where Elias Lindholm was an elite number one center and in the Selke conversation, but that was only for 1 year. It has been a massive miss in this organization. You can't argue that. You can't argue that. The other center, like Michael Backlund, has been a phenomenal center, has been an absolute workhorse, but you can't argue that he's an elite franchise center. He's been a guy that has been a great defensive center and a workhorse, no question. Elite number one center, no. Remember when Jarome Iginla was in Calgary? What was the issue with Jarome Iginla? What was the big question surrounding Jarome Iginla? Who's going to be the center for Jarome Iginla? And the best one was Craig Conroy, but Craig Conroy was not a number one center. We're not putting Craig Conroy in the McDavid, McKinnon, Celebrini, Bedard, Carlson conversation. No. So, and then Don Maloney in this interview mentions Dallas. And I think that there's been a lot of talk about Dallas and the drafting that they've done. And it's been great. I think that there's a lot to admire about what Dallas has done. But Dallas has faced Edmonton the last two Western Conference finals. And you could argue that the Dallas Stars may have been a deeper team, but they did not have a center that matched up to Connor McDavid. Rupe Hintz got hurt in both of those series, but even with a healthy Rupe Hintz, you cannot say that Rupe Hintz is in the category of a Connor McDavid. Yes, they had a Mikko Rantanen that was a superstar, but I thought the Dallas Stars were quite lucky to get to the Western Conference final last year. They found a way to explode for a bunch of goals in the third period against Colorado, and had Connor Hellebuck been able to figure out his game earlier on the road, I think Winnipeg beats Dallas in that, and they're facing Edmonton in that round. So, yes, Dallas is a good model, but have they been advanced to the Stanley Cup final? They're being literally beaten by a generational talent named Connor McDavid. So, great to have. That's great. It's great to have the idea of the Dallas Stars as a model franchise in terms of just finding and drafting players. That's great. But anyone that is watching the Calgary Flames and watching them trying to score goals, the hole is gaping wide of what they need. So you got that. Now, he was asked about they're Gavin McKenna. So this is the next question. With a top-heavy draft that includes Gavin McKenna, is it not enticing to simply lean into the hand you've been dealt with early this year? Here's his answer. In a fantasy world, yeah. Unfortunately, this isn't fantasy hockey. There's not even an agreement anymore that McKenna's going first. There's very few franchise players in every draft. Regardless of where we pick 1, 5, 10, our hope is that we get a top-level player, and that's not our focus at all. A question from Francis. Is there not a lesson to be learned by the fact that the top 4 leading scorers in the league are now all number 1 picks overall in teams like San Jose, Chicago, and Anaheim, and the Islanders? By the way, Matthew Schaefer is the Calder Trophy winner hands down right now. All turned around. And Maloney's answer again in a fantasy world is very enticing. You have to deal with the very real world too. First of all, we're very early in this season. Let's see how it plays out for the rest of the year of those teams. No disrespect, those teams are really good, but on that side, look at some of the other teams that have been in on this. I don't want to say the teams, but they've been down in missed playoffs for years and years and years. Again, I'm assuming you're talking about Buffalo and or Detroit. And then you lose your fans, you lose your interest, and nobody wants that. It seems like everyone would agree that you're missing the difference makers. How can you get them if you don't draft one, two, or three in the draft? Maloney's answer: well, Matthew Tkachuk was a pretty big difference maker, and he was drafted sixth. There's good players at the top of the draft. You don't have to be at the very bottom to get difference makers. Your odds are probably better to be at the very bottom, as we all know. But for us, it's one thing to have this discussion in March and April. It's another to be talking about it in October or November. For a team like us who came in with certain expectations, we're not going to just knee-jerk it because we've had a bad month. We're going to continue to do what we're doing, develop and draft our players the way we feel is the correct way to do it. We'll see how the next few months go. But again, it's not going to be a knee-jerk reaction for just having a very disappointing 20 games. Okay, let's unpack this because I think there's more meat on this bone with what Don Maloney is saying here. I agree with the point that you really are. It's probably in a lot of ways too early to have a lot of these conversations in some ways. You're probably having those conversations closer to March and April. I guess is in some ways you're having that conversation. Kind of understand his point. However, let me present a counter for you. This is from Pat Steinberg. So, the Elias Lindholm trade, they decided to trade when they decided to trade those players. That was back in November. Was back actually around now that they did. They were looking at trading Lindholm, Tanev, Hanifin, all of that in that situation. So I think what fans are a little concerned that. I mean, you may not want to play your hand in front of the audience around the NHL, but you better be having some conversations about the future now. It's not like you're going to be, and maybe you think that the Olympic break, you're going to be able to make some moves and have some deeper conversations, but you at least need to have some conversations now about what you're doing. I'm assuming within your group, which includes Nonis, Hanlon, Conroy, Pascal, etc., and yourself, you're talking about this now. You have to be. You can't. That's you have to be having these conversations. Even if you came in with expectations of being in the playoffs, you got to figure out. I'm assuming there's a plan A, plan B, plan C. Let's talk about the other part about this big difference maker in Matthew Tkachuk, and that's fine. He was number 6 in the draft, but I think we also need to address a significant elephant, unfortunately, in this room for the Calgary Flames, who, while improved in drafting, the first round has not. It's first round, and quite frankly, some of the other drafting hasn't been great. Of course, you had the Juuso Välimäki situation in 2017. He's no longer with the team. You didn't pick first in 2018. You gave away your first 3 picks, and your first pick was Martin Pospisil, and he's currently injured. Hold on to that part. 2019, you picked Jacob Pelche in 26, so he had 29 points in 87 games. He's now been on 3 teams. You traded him to Philadelphia as part of the Frost Farabee trade, and he is now in Tampa playing in and out of the lineup. Connor Zary was your 2020 pick, which you traded down for, by the way. And Connor Zary is struggling. I don't think anybody can argue with that. And Connor Zary has fought injuries, which is very unfortunate. 2021, you picked Matt Coronado 13. He's turning out all right. He's playing some of the best hockey of the year, but it's actually the only player in that draft that has played any NHL games. We might be seeing William Stromgren, but I'm not convinced. 2022, you had 3 picks, and you picked Topi Roney over Lane Hudson. I'll just leave that there. 2023, you picked Samuel Honzek number 1, and I think Samuel Honzek is going to be a great player, and it is absolutely heartbreaking that he's going to miss 6 months of the season, and because he's made a lot of progress. but he's played 4 games, 4 points in 23 games, and that's another problem. So you've got Honzik on the injured list, you've had Sari in and out of the injury list, and you had Zane Parak, who's now injured as well. And you also got Matt Vigrid in that draft, and that's your best draft in 2024 is a draft that you can absolutely hang your hat on. But you've got players that have had some injury from the first round that have had some injury concerns in Zary, Honzik, and Parekh. And this year you've got Cole Rushney in 2025. Cole Rushney, Cullen Potter. Potter looks like he might be a guy, but you kind of look at Cole Rushney. I think you look at a guy like Braden Coots, higher ceiling. So right now your drafting may have been better, but you're not getting those players that you think that you're getting. You might have some, but it's not a lot. So there's another concern when you're looking at the Calgary Flames that are drafting. And I am a believer that you have to draft really you as much as you need elite talent. I agree with you. It's what you do with asset management and rounds 2 to 7 that are the difference between winning a Stanley Cup and not. And here's the other thing. This isn't you talk about an opportunity that the hockey gods have presented right in front of your plate. Let's look at Edmonton right now. Things are not going splendidly well. They're currently out of a playoff spot. And yes, Connor McDavid signed a team-friendly deal, but that team-friendly deal was for 2 years. Is this not the opportunity to find an elite franchise player and start developing this team with some elite players? Because what happens if McDavid leaves Edmonton? The Oilers fans don't want to have that conversation, but the Oilers are in deep doggy doo-doo. Deep doggy doo-doo if McDavid leaves. And they may get a cup out of this, or they may not. But this is an absolute 10-bell opportunity for the Calgary Flames to find some elite talent here and build this team to be competitive by the time they get even in the new arena, or at least take advantage of an opportunity if McDavid leaves in a couple of seasons. And let's talk a little bit about Chicago, and let's talk a little bit about San Jose, because yes, they did get Bedard and Celebrini, and yes, Anaheim has gotten Carlson, but they have actually drafted really well around them. Of course, we've talked about Anaheim with Jackson Lacombe. What about San Jose with Will Smith? What about San Jose with Sam Dickinson? What about the trade for a future goaltender here that's starting to take a step in the right direction in Askarov? Chicago, Sam Rinzel is turning out to be a really solid defenseman. You got Frank Nazar, who's going to be a really solid 2 or 3 to centerman. You've got Alex Vlasic that was in the Calder conversation a few years ago. So not only, it's not like they're sitting there with Connor Bedard and nothing else. They are actually filling their cupboards behind you. Meanwhile, your cupboards in Calgary have a little bit of some red flags on the shelf. So that's concerning to me. And I guess my other part about, let's maybe continue with the conversation here. The next question, I'm with you. Nobody goes into a season saying, I hope to finish in the top 5. But what about the notion that this poor start is an opportunity to pivot for the greater good? We're still evaluating every day as we go along. This is Don's answer. And when we say, how do we improve the club? It's always with a long-term point of view. To me, it's just too early for us to be throwing in the towel. There's never going to be a point where we're going to say, let's just get rid of every player that other teams want. Okay, sure, that's fine. So when you say long-term, do you have a goal in mind in terms of when you expect this team to be competitive? In an ideal world, we're hoping to have a little pop in momentum going into the new building. But again, it's just how these young players evolve. We had this conversation in summertime. We were probably feeling a little bit better about things. We got some prospects here and some young players, but we were sitting where it's in the standings. It looks a little cloudy. Okay, fine. Enough really about that. So that's pretty much the interview. I guess here's my other concerns I'm coming away, and I want to bring in the perspective from following the Vancouver Canucks in this as well. And sort of what one of the vibes that this is giving me, this interview and this week is giving me Trevor Linden, Jim Benning vibes. Again, I just find it really weird that it's not Craig Conroy making having these interviews. I find it really odd that, according to the Eric Francis on 960, he asked for Conroy, they gave him Maloney. I just think that that's odd. I don't know what to make of it, but I definitely don't think that it's weird. It is very weird. And when I bring up Trevor Linden and Jim Benning, I bring up this point because I think that this was a very interesting kind of dynamic in the Vancouver market. Trevor Linden has been very public in saying that the Canucks needed to go through a really, what a lot of people are calling that proper rebuild, completely draft better, try to get high picks. And the Canucks, by the way, did get some high picks in Pettersson and Hughes. They've also had some misses as well. Jim Benning had a very different tone in terms of what they needed to do. Quite frankly, I don't think Jim Benning really understood how to deviate that organization or communicate it. And I kind of feel the same way right now when I'm listening to and reading Don Maloney. I am getting Jim Benning vibes from Don Maloney, and that's not a compliment. And I go back, I don't know if you watched The Traitors Canada, but Coco, who was on Big Brother Canada, I believe, a number of years ago, said something very interesting this week that's sticking to this conversation. You could be the smartest person in the room, but if you can't convince anybody, you're not going anywhere. And this basically is where I'm at with Don Maloney. There was nothing in this conversation that convinced me that the Flames are moving in a proper direction going forward. Even if they are trying to get younger, I'm not coming away with a confidence with Don Maloney that Don Maloney is going to carry this through. I don't think he articulated this vision very well. He stumbled in the Brendan Parker interview and talked about rebuild instead of retool. I think that this is a consumer confidence problem with the Calgary Flames, especially probably with the fans that are younger than 25. And it's not an age thing to me with Don Maloney as much as this. I just don't think that Don Maloney is thinking about hockey in 2025 and in 2025 terms. Daryl Sutter, when he came back to Calgary back in 2020, 2021, the bubble Canadian division year, he said it was a 3-2 league. And it may have been a 3-2 league that year, but it's now a 4-3 league this year. You're not seeing a lot of low-scoring games. You need some dynamic sort of offense. And you're watching the Flames club grind its way into another game that I wanted to talk about this year that was pretty significant was the game at home with San Jose when Macklin Celebrini in town. They win that game 2-0. The second goal is in the empty net. They outshoot the Sharks by a complete wide margin. And if Macklin Celebrini didn't miss the net, that game would have went into overtime. The Flames just do not have any offensive competence this year that is giving any consumer confidence of where this team is going. And you look at the draft right now, and Don Maloney has been involved in both the Brad Treliving years and the Craig Conroy years. So I think it's very fair to say that his fingerprints are on this organization. I cannot come here and tell you with any consistency that I have any confidence that Don Maloney is going to move this team into a Stanley Cup contendership. And this is my concern. Even if they are going younger, even if they are going to a tear it down, rebuild kind of idea, what type of player are they going to do? And what type of team are they going to do? Now, this whole Gavin McKenna conversation is going to be very interesting, but if you listen to the people that have been backing Gavin McKenna from the very top, he's still clearly the number one player in this draft. And you would be, and I think that you would come across a moron if you were picking anybody else other than Gavin McKenna as the first pick. And I'm sorry, I'm very concerned that Don Maloney would be one of those that would not pick McKenna. So This is my concern. So let's recap what's going on here. You do not have elite talent to compete in a convincing way in the Western Conference playoffs going forward. You have the president of hockey operations speaking when maybe it should have been the general manager. You have a president of hockey operations delivering a message that I think is one of the most disastrous in club history. And I've been following this club since the 80s, not to age myself, but I think that this is well up there, one of the worst weeks in Flames history. I think that I think one of the few that I can think would be worse was the whole Bill Peters situation, but that's a completely different story. But in terms of like a hockey development one, this was an absolute disaster with no consumer confidence given to from the guy that's delivering the message. And if you're not selling wins, you're selling hope. And Don Maloney did not sell hope. And I think Flame fans have every right to be concerned about the message that Don Maloney delivered, not only on TV, but in the web this week. You can follow us again at Shifts and Pucks, on Twitter at Shifts and Pucks, Facebook.com Shifts and Pucks, YouTube.com Shifts and Pucks. Subscribe wherever you have your audio. Thank you very much for listening, and we will talk to you all very soon. Bye for now.